Members of the committee, my name is Mark Meckler. I'm the president of Convention of States Action. We are the national organization that is moving this effort forward in all 50 states. Today, over 5 million American citizens are involved in this movement. They are in not only all 50 states, but every single state legislative district in America and every single congressional district in America. They represent every demographic, every age, every race, creed, and color. And they've all stood up to say that it's time for the states, and specifically you in the state legislatures, to stand strong against the federal government, to stand for the people, to stand for federalism, to stand for the very principle on which this country was founded, and that is uniquely the principle of self-governance. The founders answered a question, a unique question in human history that had not been asked by people founding a government before. And the question was simple. It was, who decides? We know exactly how they answered the question because we have it in beautiful calligraphy. You can all see the three words in your mind. The answer of the founders was, we the people. And they designed a beautifully balanced federalist system that gave the federal government limited enumerated powers, and the states and the people broad unenumerated powers. Everything not reserved specifically to the federal government left to the people and the states. Today we find ourselves in an incredibly different situation than that. In fact, the federal government has broad and unenumerated powers granted by a Supreme Court out of control and run amok. And the states now are limited. Every day the federal government gets bigger and the citizens get smaller. Thank God, and I do mean thank God, that the founders had the prescience to put the second clause of Article 5 into the Constitution. On September 15, 1787, Colonel George Mason stood and he addressed the assembly. This is 2 days before the end of convention. They're done. The Constitution has been completely drafted and they're ready to go home. And Mason stands up. He was one of the people who spoke most at convention. I'm sure they thought, oh no, here goes George again. And he said, gentlemen, we have a terrible problem with the document we've drafted. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we've not given the same power to the people acting through the states to propose amendments. And then he asked a question which I think resonates over through history, and we ought to ask ourselves this question today, and that is, do we really believe, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose the proper amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Usually when I say that, somebody in the room chuckles because they understand history. Never in recorded human history has a tyrant, has somebody who has usurped power, has a tyrannical government made a decision one day that they're going to give that power back. I think that they laughed in that room that day, September 15, 1787. In fact, I'm sure of it. We have Madison's notes. They're pretty clear. Madison's notes say in that spot only these two words, abbreviated Latin, nin com, stands for no comment. There was no debate. These were men who debated on how to debate. There was no debate. It was a collective forehead slap, if they used that gesture back then. It's the only thing I'm aware of in the United States Constitution where there was no debate, and it was adopted unanimously to give you, state legislatures, the power to rein in federal tyranny. It's an incredibly unique power. You, the state legislatures, are the most powerful actors in the United States federal government. That surprises most legislators when I talk to them in the states. When you had your orientation, they probably showed you where the restrooms were, showed you where legislative counsel's office was, showed you where your office was. They didn't tell you you were the most powerful people in the United States federal government. Why are you the most powerful people? Because only you have the power to call a convention, to propose amendments, and then actually to ratify those amendments, giving you the power to actually alter the structure of the federal government. Why you? Why didn't they just leave that in Congress's hands? Why not give it to the president or the courts? The answer is self-evident. The founders were you. They were just like you. They had served in colonial governments. They had served on town councils, state legislatures. And it's not that they thought that they were better than the people who would serve at the federal government level. It's that they trusted government close to the people. And they knew that someday a firewall would be needed. Somebody would be required to stand against federal tyranny. They had experience with centralized government tyranny. And they wanted the people to have the power close to the people. You have not only this authority, but this responsibility. This is what the founders expected of you. There have been numerous questions asked today, and I'm going to just run through and answer a couple of them real quick, if I might. It was asked, what about emergencies under a balanced budget? And I think that's a great question. Every balanced budget amendment that's ever been proposed that I'm aware of in American history has an emergencies clause. It says if the federal government, 2/3 of Congress and both houses declare an emergency, then they can violate the balanced budget. Everyone I've ever seen, 2/3, 3/4, whatever it is, there is an emergencies clause. Why would they follow any amendments if they don't follow the Constitution now? This is actually one of my favorite questions, and I think it's Representative Murphy was first to ask this question. Why would they follow it if they don't follow the Constitution now? The answer is, surprisingly for most conservatives, they do follow the Constitution now. The question is, which Constitution are we talking about? I saw the pocket Constitution handed out. Anybody who believes that we live under that pocket Constitution is living a fantasy. We haven't lived under that Constitution for over 115 years. How do I know this? Go order a Constitution from the government publishing office. I've done it. I usually bring it with me. It'll cost you about 130 bucks, and no, it's not printed on gold leaf, but it is 2,738 pages as of the 2012 edition. It's over 3,000 pages with all supplements. It contains every Supreme Court case ever issued to tell you what that little pocket Constitution means. And the federal government, they follow that big Constitution religiously. They've given themselves the power through the courts. So do they follow the Constitution? They do. And in fact, we have a long history of the federal government following constitutional amendments. Why? I heard it's just a piece of paper. Why would they follow it? I agree with that. What's the magic pixie dust? And the answer is politics. All of you got elected. You understand politics. You understand political muscle and organizing. And the reality is there is no more muscular political effort that can be done in the United States of America than to get a constitutional amendment ratified. It's the highest bar in our entire system of American governance. It requires 3/4 of the states to agree on something. How often does 3/4 of your legislature agree on something? So it's incredible when you can get 3/4 of states to agree on something. It means the vast majority of the American public have spoken. And we have a long history in this country that amendments are followed. And I agree, over time, we will drift away from them. It takes about 100 years historically. So the idea that we would pass amendments and the federal government would just choose to ignore, it's not supported by history. It's not reality. Quite frankly, it's a fantasy. I've heard the language is vague. You can do anything under this language. The people who allege that are not scholars. They're not lawyers. They're not people who studied the issue. On my legal advisory board are the finest conservative constitutional scholars in America. They had input on the drafting of this resolution. Robbie George from Princeton, Randy Barnett, who runs the Georgetown Center for the Constitution, Mike Ferris, Rob Nadelson, the premier writer and author and student of Article 5 in the United States of America, Mark Levin. Absolutely, as there are multiple protections along the way. Every state, 34 states, have to agree on the terms of the convention. Under what scenario do people think when 34 states agree that they're going to go there and then they're all going to disagree? You control your own commissioners to the convention. You commission them. You have authority to control them. You have done so in legislation already. They go to convention. You can withdraw their credentials at convention. Any state can withdraw their commissioners or replace their commissioners at any time. This is standard law of agency. It's not even complicated constitutional law. I heard a question, why is this necessary now? Do we really have to ask that question? Look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., and I'm not being partisan when I say this. Almost 29 trillion in debt. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and into perpetuity enslaved by the debt being imposed by the federal government. The federal government with its thumb on the scales here in Wisconsin, 60 to 65% of your budget, the state legislatures of a sovereign state, 60 to 65% of your budget now controlled by the federal government. It's unconscionable. Why now? Washington, D.C. doesn't represent the American people anymore. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats, 50% of the country is angry about what's going on in D.C., and they should. They should be angry because this stuff was not meant to be decided in Washington, D.C. I got to address this. I heard a quick comment about Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh spoke multiple times in favor of the use of Article 5. God rest his soul. I heard a question about state legislatures or ratifying conventions. And God bless the pastor that came up here and has done so much great work for the Lord. but he has no idea what he's talking about on Article 5. State ratifying conventions are controlled by whom? By you. What's a state ratifying convention? Whatever you decide it is. It's not Congress. The method is chosen by Congress. It will be state legislatures or state ratifying conventions, and it goes to you here in the state legislature, and you will decide what your ratifying convention looks like. It's federalism. You might decide your ratifying convention is your legislature. You have the right to do that. You might decide to appoint people. You might decide to elect people, but it's up to you. The states control the ratifying process. I'll conclude with this. The question has been asked several times. What is the alternative? The vast majority of us agree that the federal government is out of control. Over 85% of Americans say we need some sort of balanced budget amendment. Same numbers for some form of term limits. 72% of Americans say that the federal government is too big and does too much. This crosses party lines. We all agree. We may not agree exactly where it's too big or why it's too big, but we all agree it's too big and does too much. The opponents say, don't do this. Do something else. Most of them offer no something else. I've heard elect good people. How's that working out for us? I heard use Article 6, make people live up to their oaths. How's that working out for us? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. For decades now, people have been wanting to call an Article 5 convention. And the same opponents step up and try to stop it. Today, $29 trillion in debt, the federal government completely out of control, and states reduced to mere fiefdoms of the federal government. It is time for the states to stand up and fight back. 15 states have already joined this effort. This has been filed in 49 states. It's been passed by committees in 30 states. 23 states have passed it in one house or another. And I'm here to ask you to pass the resolution, to vote favorably, and to make Wisconsin the 16th state to join the Convention of States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions? Representative Rantham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was spinning with thought after the last two presenters prior to you. They were actually speaking in opposition. 2 points I took away from their concerns were the enforcement factor and maintaining the oath element, and you touched on them as well in your presentation. By the way, thank you very much for your testimony. I had the same question regarding oath, maintenance of your oath on January 7th, that people took, January 4th of this year to be in the assembly specifically, when we were looking to address the resolution to end the executive order for the emergency. And 42 people voted no. So it hit me kind of hard that day, not just because I was the lead in the assembly on the resolution, but that was the question I had. It's like, well, I'm here to serve, and I took an oath to abide by the Constitution of our state, and this vote, and I did a floor speech on this, really brief, 58 seconds, I think it was, probably one of the shortest speeches on the floor, but that question hit me, and it's hitting me again today. If we take oaths to be public servants and to serve the people that put us here, and to be to interpose, as Pastor Torello would say, why did they vote no? It's politics. It's got to be. It's a political ideology that you embrace more than your belief or your confidence in your oath. So my question is, if politics is driving people to not enforce existing laws, if politics is driving people to not uphold their oath that they took to be in the position to serve of, by, and for the people, is Constitution of States in Article 5 going to affect that? Is it going to prevent politics from creating more issues?
Thank you for the question, Representative. No, I don't think it does prevent politics. I think what it does is engage in politics. And actually, what I believe we need in this country are more people engage, like you saw all the activists here engage. over 30,000 citizens here in Wisconsin that have signed the Convention of States petition. I don't know this for sure, but probably the largest grassroots organization in Wisconsin. It is in most states in the country right now. And those people are broadly and widely engaged in politics. They're here at the Capitol today in huge numbers, and have been for the last several years. So I want more politics, not less politics. What I want is a muscular political effort. We all want more people who are engaged and understand our Constitution. If you want to engage in the largest constitutional education exercise in the history of the United States of America, then we call a convention of states. It will be on C-SPAN 24/7. It will be in the schools from K through colleges. It will be on the news every single night. And this is what we need in America. We need to have people paying attention to the Constitution, not having it be some arcane document in the National Archives that in most schools we're not even teaching our kids about anymore. So I want the politics to come into play. And by that, I mean, I want us, those of us who believe in the greatness of this country and the constitutional and declarations, foundations for the country, the Judeo-Christian principles on which it's based, I want us engaged in politics in a broad scale. That's the only way you get to a convention in the first place. And that's the only way that a convention will propose amendments that ultimately get ratified.
Thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Look, if you could, Article 6 has been brought up.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a direct answer to the contrast between an Article 5 and an Article 6? Because obviously the premise for either is the same. So everybody's on the same team.
Right.
It's just, how do we fix the crises that
Right.
is being asserted here?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Article 6 is the oath of office. And the suggestion is we should just get people to obey the oath of office. And I would propose that if somebody knows how to do that, they have the wisdom of Solomon. I'm unaware of how you enforce that. I'm not aware of, other than removal from office by recall or in an election. If you fail to live up to your oath, you can be essentially recalled by your constituents if you have recall in a state, or you can be voted out in the next election. It's not a mechanism, and it was not designed by the founders as a mechanism for the people to regain their power. The founders would have said, if people are violating their oath of office, throw them out of office. So it's not a mechanism for the regaining of power. It is a point, and it's a good point. If people fail to live up to their oath of office, then in the next election, their constituents should remove them from office. I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to